All right, let's take one last look at your traffic and weather for your ride in on this Tuesday morning as everybody comes back in from the long weekend. As of right now, not a whole lot going out there on the roadways. Do have one accident at Bauer Parkway between Piney Grove and Harbison Boulevard. Have another accident out at Millstream Road and Corley Mill Road. But for the most part, everything looking relatively okay on the interstates here in town. Let's take a quick peek at your weather. It's going to be a little bit warmer today, high of 66, currently 45 in downtown Columbia here on The Game. Oh, 9 o'clock on your Monday morning. Dang it, Jack, I've already messed up. It's not Monday, it's Tuesday. Those long weekends throw me for a loop. It is Tuesday morning. Welcome into the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you here after a long weekend. Hopefully it treated you well, Jack. How you doing today?
Man, 40 seconds into the show, and we already had
It's an honest mistake.
It is an honest mistake. So we'll let it slide. We can't have any the rest of the next 2 hours, though.
I hope not. Now, so that's the thing about the early part of the year, because we have a couple of, Monday holidays, and, you kind of get into a rhythm of the year, and you have a couple of those days that throw you for a loop, but we don't have another Monday holiday until Memorial Day, which is in May, so we'll get into the rhythm of being in here each and every Monday where I won't have to think about it like that again.
Yeah, but, we'll be fine, but... Doing okay, man. It was a nice long weekend. I can't say I didn't enjoy having Monday off, but glad to be back in here. And boy, we've got a lot to talk about in Gamecock athletics. It feels like it's been a bit since we've had a full slate of South Carolina things going on, but here we are.
Valentine's Day, good.
Oh,
successful.
yeah. I told you last week about the painting date.
Yes,
with
how was
Carolina.
that?
Oh, went fantastic. So the thing was, I booked it for 6 to 8 p.m. on Saturday.
Okay.
I didn't realize that meant, I need to be there at 6 p.m. because the place was open until 9:30. So I'm thinking just show up sometime between 6 and 8 and I'll be good.
Right.
Because I was at baseball and it's 5:30 and I'm like, oh man, I got to get there. So Caroline comes and picks me up. I just leave the press conference right after Paul's done speaking.
Yeah.
And then I get in the car and we're off and we get there a little late, but it was fun, man. We painted for about 2 hours and it was so relaxing to just not be on my phone and just focusing on trying to paint, which is it was fun. It was a good time.
We went to emo night downtown on Friday.
Okay.
I forget the name of the place. The New Brooklyn Tavern. That's what it was.
Cool.
And their little club next to it. They were having emo night, and we didn't get to go to the emo night the other week because Peyton had to work that weekend. But she's like, oh hey, they're doing another emo night. Let's do that. So if you saw me at emo night, yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
But that was fun. And then we just hung around. I made some steaks on Saturday.
Nice.
Went to Old Time Meat Market and got some of their sirloins, and those things were phenomenal. So yes, successful Valentine's Day.
Yes, that's awesome, man. And overall in South Carolina athletics, as we transition to the Sandstorm pick me up, I think Gamecock athletics pretty good weekend overall, I'd say, from what we were expecting at least.
Overall, I'd say it was a successful weekend as we pick it apart over the course of the next hour or so. There are going to be some things that are concerning, but at the end of the day, women's basketball won. Baseball won the series, and men's basketball, they just kind of are what they are. Softball also won their weekend as well.
Yes.
Can't forget that.
Yes, softball swept through their weekend.
With a couple run rules as well.
Yes.
So good to see them get back on track. And we'll talk about all this over the course of the show. But first, it is time for that Sandstorm Pick Me Up.
Time to get hyped? Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm, sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nines.
It's time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick Me Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803 all nines. Oh, don't worry. We're going to get into what Coach Maneri had to say after Game 3. That's going to be its own individual little segment coming up in a minute. But first, I think we need to focus on each game individually for South Carolina over the weekend as they took on Northern Kentucky. Win game number 1, 5-2. Win game number 3, 6-5, and then lose game number or win game number 2, 6-5, and lose game number 3, 3-2. Of course, games number 1 and 2 were on Friday as part of the doubleheader because of the weather coming in for Sunday that shifted everything around. By the way, thanks to everybody that came out and hung out with us at Village Idiot Pete's on Friday. We had to move everything up because of the weather, but still a good crowd out there. A lot of you came out and saw us, which was great. Hopefully, you also enjoyed getting out to seeing 18 innings of baseball and all that as well. Because all in all, Friday went as you needed it to go. Starting off with game number 1, again, that 5-2 win for South Carolina. And one of the things that we were looking at going into that game was how is Riley Goodman going to pitch in his Gamecock and college debut. And I thought he gave you a very solid outing. 3 2/3 innings, 4 hits, no runs allowed, 5 strikeouts, 2 walks, and he hit that exact 70 pitch mark that Maneri was talking about coming into the weekend. And again, yes, it's a lower competition level in Northern Kentucky, but I thought for what his debut was, very solid.
Yeah, he got into some trouble here and there, but he always worked out of it. And I think it was the 4th inning there where he really couldn't get out of it, and that's when Maneri had to go to Josh Gunther, and he was able to get out of it and go from there. It was like a bases-loaded jam, I think, in the 4th inning. But, yeah, Riley looked good. First start. And I think that's the main thing I think we could take away from this weekend is that the pitching overall, very good. The starting pitching in particular, while the guys didn't really go very long, they were on that 70 pitch count. I mean, Brandon Stone only threw 60 pitches on Saturday in Game 3. And before that, I mean, it looked pretty sharp overall throughout the weekend. And I think that's a really positive sign in the right direction.
Yeah, that's something else that Maneri talked about, going into the weekend was looking at guys like Josh Gunther and rely on them in long relief, which is exactly what you got out of him, there on Friday to be able to kind of bridge it all the way until the end, until when Valentin had to come in there to close things down in the 9th inning. So overall, like I said, great pitching performances for the most part over the weekend. We'll get into some of the other individual ones coming up in a moment. And the bats, I'd say, fairly active for the first game on Friday, especially when you talk about Talmadge LeCroy, who came into the season the hottest hitter in the preseason, and he carried that over into the first game.
Yeah, he had 3 hits on Friday in that Game 1, and those were his only hits of the weekend, but still, a 3-hit performance to get the year going was really nice. The other thing I will say that really stood out in this first game was, like you said, the bats did hit fairly well. It wasn't amazing by any means. They didn't get their first runs until the bottom of the 5th, but they only struck out once in Game 1. So, look, I know it's Northern Kentucky, but Northern Kentucky actually, I think, is a decent little squad. They're a tournament-level team, I think, for their conference. And, I think this is a team that could definitely make some noise this year potentially. And for South Carolina, they gave them fits, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, only 1 strikeout on Friday in that Game 1, which is really impressive.
1 strikeout, 4 walks during that game, and that's something that stood out to me. There was a lot of situations where guys were getting into a little bit of a hole, maybe being down 0-2 or 1-2 in the count, and being able to work it up to getting walks. So pretty good plate discipline in that first game particularly, which is something that this team did struggle with a week ago. So for game number 1, that was nice to see.
No, it really was nice to see.
As we move on to game number 2 against South Carolina, picks up the 6-5 victory and the series win, which obviously the highlight of the entire weekend was KJ Scoba hitting the walk-off home run there in the bottom of the 9th, and obviously we're expecting big things out of him in year number 2, and that was really kind of his biggest day of the entire weekend. Went 0 for 4 in game number 1, went 1 for 5 in game number 3, but hey, when the chips were down and you had to have somebody step up, it was nice to see your true sophomore in that. Really didn't waste any time because he was the only batter of that inning, be able to help elevate you to that win.
No, he did. Yeah, it was definitely a great moment for South Carolina. Great win on Friday night. Like, I think a lot of people are expecting South Carolina to just run through these opponents and blow them out and run rule them. It's not always how it works, right? South Carolina will have those games throughout the year, but it's not going to be every single game where South Carolina is run ruling, and that may not be good enough for some people. But I think the way this team fought back and won that game, because they were down multiple times in that game. It took a pair of 2 RBI hits from Tyler Bach to get this team back in the game, and then it was KJ who kind of stole the show at the end with the walk-off home run, and that type of win can do a lot for momentum. Now, as we'll get into, it really didn't do much for South Carolina the next day, but overall, it was a good Friday for sure. And the other thing I will say, KJ, I think he's going to have a decent year. I really don't like him in the 3-hole. I think there are other guys on this team that need to step up and hit more, and KJ, I think, could be more of a middle-of-the-order bat. I just don't look at him and think, yeah, that's your 3-hole hitter right there. I think of him more as a 5- or 6-hole hitter who can kind of complement the bigger power threats in the middle of the order, just because, as we saw on Sunday, didn't really hit too well.
You mentioned Tyler Bach there, who allowed KJ Scoba to be in that position by virtue of that 2-run RBI there in the bottom of the 8th. He had the best overall game in game number 2, 3 for 5 with 4 RBIs. And again, he's somebody that I think we were very excited for coming into the year, given what we'd heard about him coming into the year, and that he was the lock for that leadoff role. And over the weekend, did his job pretty effectively. Drew a couple walks, and obviously had the big, strong performance for game number 2 there late on Friday. So I'm excited to see what he's going to be this season.
Yes, and as we shift into game 3, it was a tough day for South Carolina. It kind of rounded out everything we knew about this team in games 1 and 2, but it kind of came to the surface more so because they lost this game. So they fell 3-2 on Saturday in game 3. Brandon Stone, good pitching outing, but the problem was they went 0 for 7 with runners in scoring position. They really, outside of Reese Moore, who had a 3-hit day, solo home run, double in the 9th inning, it took South Carolina until that bottom of the 9th to really get anything going offensively. I mean, they had the bases loaded with 2 outs, and a single from KJ Scobie probably wins the game. Definitely ties it for sure. But the story of the weekend, I think, for South Carolina is going 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position and 10 for 47 with runners on base. We saw this was the big, I would say this was probably one of the biggest issues for the 2025 team. And you went out into the portal and you brought in a ton of new offensive pieces. You had 6 new players starting in the lineup on opening day, and feels like the same result. It's too soon to say what this team is and what it isn't after 3 games, but definitely was not a good sign to see them struggle that much with runners in scoring position.
Yeah, which, by the way, how funny is it that 2 games in a row, KJ Scobie has the opportunity to be the hero both times. Obviously works out in game number 2 on Friday, doesn't work out in game number 3 on Saturday, but despite the fact that you had such a poor outing at the plate, you still were in position to win that game. And we'd feel a little better saying it was a sweep for the weekend. If you were able to capitalize there, and Scobie was able to drive in a couple guys there in the bottom of the 9th. But you're right, for a team that we were promoted as having a lot more power, fixing the bats in the lineup and all that kind of stuff, I didn't see enough of that over the course of the weekend to give me like a ton of optimism coming away from it. Now, again, it's 1 series, it's 3 games, it's not indicative of what the entire season is going to be, but I didn't see enough from the offense over the weekend to say, okay, that looks a whole lot better than it did last year.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the top 6 guys in the order on Saturday went 2 for 25. That's not good enough, especially when you're counting on a lot of those guys to be your main source of offense. And look, it's 1 loss, but I think a lot of people are really up in arms over this team already after 1 game. I mean, the fireman tweets were going out and everyone's overreacting. We'll get into what he said later on because that obviously only added more fuel to the fire. But it's 1 game. You look around the rest of the SEC, Arkansas dropped a game this weekend.
Yep.
Florida dropped a game. Georgia, Alabama. Vanderbilt went 1-2. I mean, there's a lot of teams that didn't do great this weekend, and they were playing mid-major opponents just like South Carolina. So, look, the Gamecocks won the series, but I think the bigger thing is it's not even just the fact they lost. It's more so how they played this weekend. Is they kind of got outplayed a little bit by Northern Kentucky, and that's a little concerning, I think.
And again, the thing that made its rounds, what Coach Murray had to say after game number 3 on Saturday in reference to the energy level of his team after playing their first series. We'll get into that coming up next. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri with you on your Tuesday here on The Game.
If you're a small business owner, a church, or other entity in need of a new HVAC system, AAA Heating and Air has exciting news for you. AAA Heating and Air now offers financing to qualified organizations to aid them in installing a new light commercial HVAC system. It's as easy as calling AAA Heating and Air for a quote or find them online at callAAAtoday.com. Tell them Jack Veltri from 107.5 The Game sent you on over at AAA Heating and Air. They have got your back. They are offering up to 12-month payment plans on repairs with no credit check required. That's right. No need to worry about your credit score. As long as you're a homeowner with a valid bank account, you'll be good to go. Take control of your comfort today by giving a call to AAA Heating and Air at 803-677-1500. Again, the number to call AAA Heating and Air is 803-677-1500. Give them a call today and breathe easy again.
All right, welcome back in. Extra Point, Sourhead and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Tuesday on the Game. Recapping the first series of the 2026 South Carolina baseball season, where Carolina takes 2 of 3 against Northern Kentucky, but look noticeably lethargic in game number 3 as they fall to the Norse 3-2. And Coach Neri did address that after the game on Saturday about his team and where their energy level was entering the third game.
Well, it wasn't really today, David, just with runners in scoring position. We just didn't swing the bats good at all today. It's just, it's hard to understand, really. I expected a lot more. I told you yesterday, I thought we'd come out and really explode today. I knew the guys were tired from yesterday. It was a long day, 18 innings. It was, we had a lot of guys whose legs were cramping and so forth. So we decided not even to take batting practice on the field and just do it exclusively in the batting cages to try to let their bodies heal a little bit. But obviously, I didn't have them ready to play today. They just needed to, be a little more disciplined and ready to go. And I just kind of felt like, they played like they were very tired from yesterday. And, no matter, what you try to do to inspire them, sometimes it just doesn't work. And, I just felt like, everything was just in slow motion today, that we were doing a lot of walking around. Our bat speed wasn't good. We were swinging at bad pitches. And, I thought we were going to go the other direction today. I thought they'd be really excited about playing. It's only the second day of the season, but I just think, maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. We should have just gone through a batting practice session. If guys were too sore to play, I should have just played somebody else. But, I just thought we'd be hitting better than we are.
That one point in there where he says it's only the second day of the season is where everybody's concern level really ticked up when they heard this over the weekend. And yes, playing 18 innings of baseball is a very, very long day. And you pointed out something interesting in one of your articles writing about the weekend, Jack, like, hey, most of these guys probably used to that from travel ball, high school, whatever. Maybe this is not a foreign thing to them, and it's the very beginning of the season. Sure, if you get down to the very end of the year, and what I think Vanderbilt's the last series, and you had to play a doubleheader against Vanderbilt on a Saturday before wrapping up the series on Sunday, I can understand a little bit of fatigue there because it's been a long season at that point. But you're just getting started, right? And one of the things that was exposed about this team a year ago in that article that John Whittle wrote was them maybe not putting in as much in the weight room as they had in years prior in terms of the previous fall going back to 2024. Apparently that had been fixed. They've adjusted things back to more conditioning, more weights, and all that kind of stuff. But clearly it wasn't effective enough for the first weekend because your entire team was gassed after one doubleheader.
The first part of what he said was where he just needed to leave it at. Like, we didn't hit well, didn't hit with runners in scoring position. I didn't do enough, didn't do a good enough job with these guys. End of story. End of story. Just leave it there, Paul. You don't need to say what you said after that because, man, it is like I about laughed out loud hearing that in person. Like, it's astonishing. We are 2 days into the season and you're tired. I don't care that you played 18 innings the day before. You've been playing for weeks at this point. You should be fine. It is, and if guys are tired, then do exactly that. Play other guys. And the fact that it only took 3 games for him to already throw people under the bus. That was a common trend from last year. But also the fact that he made it kind of sound like the guys didn't want to take BP. And he kind of just let it happen. Isn't it his decision to kind of make all this stuff happen? Like, on a weekend where South Carolina went 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position, don't you think they should be taking BP before that Sunday game? I get they took indoor batting cage work, but that's not the same as hitting on the field. That just screams kind of lazy to me. And you're in a season where you have to really get things turned around. And for that to be the excuse 3 games into the season, I've just never seen anything like that before. And if he hadn't said that, I think people are feeling like, okay, South Carolina won 2 out of 3, didn't hit particularly well on Saturday, so be it. But you got this statement that comes after Game 3, and it's like that's where people are getting really annoyed, is just hearing that their team is tired, and that's why they lost this game, not the fact that they couldn't hit worth much at all in Game 3. And the funny thing is, I asked Paul later on in the press conference, like, hey, you guys are supposed to have a doubleheader here coming up against Princeton in March, and with the weather and how things work, this probably won't be the last time you guys are in a situation where you're playing a doubleheader and then the day game the next day. How are you guys going to be better prepared for that when the time comes? And it's silly that we had to even ask something like that. Like, the fact that he was even brought up to begin with was just, it should never have been said. But we know Paul, and he's a great quote sometimes, for better or worse.
I was going to say, sometimes the honesty is the opposite of what you need in a situation like that, because that only creates more concern. And that's the thing. Conditioning is done in the off season. It's done in the fall. It's done in the winter, and all that kind of stuff. You can't suddenly fix that in season, because you're now playing games. You get limited practice time during the week. You can't suddenly fix your team's stamina now that the season has begun. That should have been done in October, November, whenever they were doing those kind of conditioning workouts and stuff like that. So the die is kind of cast at this point in time, and you have what you have. And like you said, you're going to run into not only the fact you have one scheduled against Princeton coming up here in a couple weeks, but you're going to run into weather and stuff like that. It's going to shift things around, and you're going to have double headers against Florida or Tennessee or LSU or whoever. That's going to inevitably happen at some point during this year. And I think we're all going to look at that and say, well, they're not really going to be worth much the day after, because clearly they're not conditioned to be able to handle 18 innings in one day, it seems like.
And here's the thing. One of the storylines going into tonight when they go play Wofford and Spartanburg is, are they going to play tired, or are they going to play like a team that is ready to show up and hit the baseball? And even after the fact, the storyline going into tomorrow is, okay, well, you had to drive 90 minutes to and from Spartanburg, and you're playing a back-to-back. Are the guys going to be tired going into tomorrow's game? Like, it's so foolish and so silly that is even, we're even asking that question heading into this, because it's 3 games into the year, and these guys shouldn't even, like, they're 18 to 24-year-old guys. Like, they're not. It's not like they're aging vets in the MLB and they're 35 to 40 years old and they're on their last legs as a pro. Like, no, they are youthful players that should have tons of energy and are good to play. And the fact that we're even talking about this as a real topic right now, I understand if it's middle of the year, guys are banged up, injured, they're going through a tough stretch, but man, we're 3 games into the year, man. Like, come on, like, this is just it's insane that this is the discussion right now.
Well, and especially with how much of a struggle last year was, and not that week number 1 suddenly or series number 1 suddenly fixes everything, but I think we were all hoping to see something that was radically much further along than what last year was, to kind of say, hey, look how much different this team is. And again, we got to give a lot of credit to pitching, because they did have a really solid outing, all things considered, over the weekend. But the bats were the big area of concern coming this year, because you were down on offense last year. Your power was really low, and you didn't see a ton this weekend to instill hope that, it's suddenly going to tick back up when conference play starts. We'll get into some of the specific numbers in a minute, because I want to introduce something called the Stats That Matter, which we're going to talk about after each and every baseball game this year, because these are stats that kind of tell the story of how the game went and why you won or lost in the situation that happened with South Carolina on Saturday. I also want to get to some of your thoughts as well. If you want to weigh in on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines or the Firehouse Subs text line, hit us up 803-404-6100. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri on your Tuesday here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Again, recapping everything that happened with Gamecock baseball for their first series of the season. And don't got to wait long to see them back in action. They are taking on Wofford tonight up in Spartanburg. First pitch at 5:30. Pregame coverage going to start at 5:15. That is going to be at our sister station, WOMG 98.5 FM, because we're going to have men's basketball tonight taking on Florida with a tip at 7 o'clock. And then baseball back in action tomorrow as well. That'll be back here on 107.5 The Game as they take on Gardner Webb at 4 o'clock with pregame coverage starting at 3:45 right here on The Game. We'll have some tickets to give away for that coming up in a little bit, but we're still in the midst of reacting to everything that happened over series number one, mainly around the comments that Maneri had to say about the team being fatigued after playing 18 innings on Friday. I took a call from Marv during the break, couldn't hang on the phone line, but he did want to bring up a couple of points, and one of them he mentioned, and you can speak to this, Jack, was there a couple-week break that was taken during the offseason in reference to the team maybe dealing with some fatigue then? Is there any validity to that? Or a extended break?
Well,
extended break.
The only break that I know of would be, so they scrimmaged all fall. Like, they scrimmaged a lot. They had the winter, like the Christmas break. That's the only break I can think of, because after that, they got after it right as school started in January, and then they were scrimmaging up until opening day. So the only break I could think of was when they were done with fall in November, mid-November, and then they obviously still work out and whatnot, but
Sure.
They'd go home for Christmas and then come back in January. So that's the only break I could think of, going home and doing your own work, but not like an extended break of not that I could think of what he's trying to refer to.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that, and I also brought up a point about, and this is what we have some people asking about on the Firehouse Subs text line as well. Like, got to look at Monty League when it comes to this hitting issue as well. Now, again, it's one series, and they could go out there and be the best hitting team in the SEC for the rest of the year, but Monty Lee is overhitting. Last year was a struggle. Again, the emphasis in the offseason was improving that area, particularly with the guys that you brought in from the portal and all that kind of stuff. And through one weekend, it didn't look great. So, and I think we're going to continue to look at this as the games and the weeks go by, but it didn't give you a ton of confidence coming away from week number one, given what you saw, at the plate.
As much as Paul is going to be under scrutiny this season with every move he makes, so is Monty Lee, and so is Terry Rooney. Now, Rooney's off to a good start because the pitching staff looked very, very sharp this weekend. Like, outside of Cooper Parks and Parker Marlott, who struggled this weekend, both of which I expect to get more outings, especially Marlott, a guy that is typically very good. That was just a very uncharacteristic outing from him on Friday night where he gives up 3 runs. Parks wasn't great on Saturday, a big part of why Carolina lost that game, but the Bats should have been able to score more runs to help him. The pressure's going to be on Monty to get this thing right, and I think he's a good coach, but this is it's only 3 games, so let's not overreact. But they struck out 15 times, but they walked 15 times, which is good. You probably want to have that type of success in that way. You didn't steal any bases this weekend, 0 for 2 on the bases, so I thought they would be a little bit more active in trying to steal bases, but when they did, it just didn't work out. And some of the situations that they tried stealing bases in were just kind of like, what are you doing in those situations? They hit 4 home runs this weekend, and, it wasn't great at the plate offensively. The big stat that will tell you the story of the weekend is going 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position. That's just something we saw so often last year was this team. I don't even know the exact number of how they did with runners in scoring position, but it wasn't great. And for that to kind of carry over this past weekend, and I think it's even more being brought to the surface just because it comes against a team like Northern Kentucky. And when you're playing the big boys later in the year, how are you going to stack up against those teams when you can't hit with runners in scoring position? But we got to take it all with a grain of salt right now because it is only one weekend, and they're going to have plenty of opportunities to right the ship. But you hope it comes sooner rather than later.
And look, for the sake of this fan base as a whole, not just for baseball specifically, we need one of these sports to really be good, right? I'm talking about men's sports here because obviously the women's sports are handling their business and doing their job here, but it's been a struggle for the past calendar year. And, men's basketball obviously isn't looking great right now. We'd really like baseball to be competitive, be in the mix for a tournament spot as the season goes along, just to give us something to be excited and happy about, because it's been a while since we'll be able to have that, when it comes to the men's sports. And hopefully this weekend was the anomaly and not a telling sign of what this team's going to be this year.
The good thing is they did win 2 out of 3, right?
They did. That was the most important part.
They won this series, right? Like I mentioned before, there were some teams that lost games to mid-majors this past weekend, like Florida lost to UAB on opening day, right? They lost a game that they probably shouldn't have. And Florida's ranked. The thing is, like, some of these teams that lost this weekend are ranked. So it could be a lot worse. Like, nobody's really expecting South Carolina to do much. They just got to hit more, right? It's not like they lost that game because they gave up a ton of runs, right? It's just because they couldn't get a hit in a key situation. And I think that's something where that's going to happen, from time to time, is they're going to not be able to drive in runs every key situation. But you hope more throughout the year when they get those opportunities, they're going to come through more times than not.
So I want to introduce something called the stats that matter for baseball. And baseball of any sport is maybe where statistics tell you the story of how good or bad a team is more often than not. And there are kind of 7 stats that I've outlined here, 4 on offense and 4 on defense, that I think tell you the story of where a team is at. And we'll look at it for the individual series as well as specific, one games like we're going to have tonight, taking on Wofford up there in Spartanburg. And I'll start with runners in scoring position, as you mentioned. South Carolina on the weekend, 4 of 30, including 0 of 7 in game number 3 on Saturday. Runners on base, in terms of their batting, 10 of 47 for the entire weekend, also not great. Strikeouts, you mentioned 15 total, but 10 of those came in game number 3 on Saturday. Walks, 15 total, solid 4, 5, and 6 across the weekend. So pretty good numbers there in terms of being disciplined at the plate and not swinging at too many bad pitches. So overall, again, that kind of tells you the story of where things are at offensively for this team. And then defensively and pitching, solid numbers. You had, 38 total strikeouts for the weekend, 12, 15, and 11. Good solid numbers. Free passes, which are walks and hit batters, good solid numbers as well, 4, 5, and 4. It's only 13 on the weekend, and then 4 total errors on the weekend as well, which, again, not bad, all things considered. Want to clean that up, especially the 2 you had on Saturday, but not terrible considering some of the things that we've seen in the past. So, again, that kind of tells you the story that offense, a lot left to be desired, defense and pitching, solid, all things considered.
I'll also add one more additional stat. Only 4 extra base hits allowed this weekend. 3 doubles and a home run. I think you take that, honestly. That feels really good, I think, to see South Carolina keeping the ball in the yard, really keeping it to just singles, right? You can take that. Like, Northern Kentucky didn't hit great this weekend at all. They just hit a little bit better than South Carolina did in Game 3 specifically to pull away and win. And also, you mentioned the errors. That's part of why Northern Kentucky was able to win this game, was because one of those errors, which was a throw from Patrick Evans to third base to try and get the lead runner out, went down the third base line. And here's a few things with that play. Number one, KJ Scobie, the cutoff man in that situation, should have been able to pick off the ball and haul it in and keep everyone at bay. The other thing, when you watch that clip back of the play, Brandon Stone wasn't covering behind third base, because typically the pitcher is supposed to stand behind the certain base where the throw is going into, and whether it's home or second or third specifically, he's supposed to be there. He wasn't in that situation. If he is, maybe he scoops up the ball and holds the runner at third. Instead, nobody's there, and that allows the run to score pretty easily. So as much as it is about the stats, it is also about the fundamentals of just being in the right place at the right time, picking up the ball, getting the glove where it's supposed to be. Like, there's such little things that make a difference in this game, and we saw that kind of on full display in that one sequence on Saturday where one run makes the difference.
Lead of the day, South Carolina did win the series 2 games out of 3, which gives them a winning record so far to start the season. They're back in action today, taking on Wofford, coming up at 5:30 up in Spartanburg. Again, you can listen to that on our sister station 98.5 WOMG. They're back at home tomorrow as they take on Gardner Webb, and I have 2 family 4-packs of tickets right now for college number 4 and 5 at 803-404-6100 if you want to see game number 5 for South Carolina this season. Again, tomorrow afternoon, taking on Gardner Webb. Call us at 803-404-6100. We'll come back. We will wrap up hour number 1. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Peltry here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry wrapping up hour number 1 here on your Tuesday on The Game. Again, we spent the majority of the first hour focusing on baseball as they pick up the 3-2 series win over Northern Kentucky. But again, some concerns in terms of the fatigue, energy, all that kind of stuff with Carolina that hopefully can be corrected going forward, but we'll certainly have to see. They're back in action, taking all the service academies at home this upcoming weekend, and we'll preview that series, tournament series, whatever you want to call it, as the week does go along. But we also had a very, very important game in women's basketball over the weekend as South Carolina goes on the road once again, picking up the win in Baton Rouge, and Dawn Staley rocking a very familiar outfit out there in Baton Rouge.
Actually, we were just trying to figure out what to wear, and we did, and our staff wanted to wear white, and then somebody else brought up, let's do the boot hoodies, and I think everybody stayed in character because I heard a lot of boos again.
There was a fair amount of boos for Carolina out there in Baton Rouge, but they walk out with the victory 79-72 as they take down number 6 LSU. They've now won 18 in a row, and it can't be a rivalry because the other side's not winning in this dominance, one-sided series as once again South Carolina gets the better of Kim Mulkey and her team in a raucous environment on Saturday, but they walk out with the win nonetheless.
Real nice game for the Gamecocks. This was a game that I think if South Carolina, well, regardless of result, I think South Carolina was going to be okay. It was clear LSU needed this game more so than South Carolina, just for momentum's sake, just getting the monkey off their back of not being able to beat South Carolina under Kim Mulkey, but that streak will continue at least through the potential of them facing off again in the SEC tournament, if not NCAA tournament or next season. So they're going to have to wait to try and get another win, or try to get a win over the Gamecocks, but it just hasn't happened. And to go on the road to Baton Rouge, beat a top 10 team, it's a really impressive feat, and it took some good performances to get there. You got some real nice shooting days out of Tessa Johnson, who had 21 points. Medina Okot, really good game, 12 points, 17 rebounds, really good on the boards, and just a real nice game for her. But I think the other thing is just going 8 of 17 from three-point range. When you look at LSU going 2 of 12 from deep, I think that really sticks out.
Yeah, and you could definitely see that you were kind of in LSU's head during this game. There was the viral moment where Kim Mulkey's yelling at her team on who can guard Tessa Johnson, because Tessa was just absolutely on fire there in the first half, and they were able to kind of hold her in check there. She did end up getting some points late in the game, but overall she had such a profound effect on what LSU was trying to do. It allowed other players on the team to be able to go out there and make some buckets as well. And, you know, when you get into a game like this, and I predicted it on Friday, we get into our headlines coming up at the end of the next hour, I predicted this game was going to go into overtime because I thought it was going to be that nip and tuck back and forth, which for the most part it very much was. You turn to your best players at the very end of these games to go out there to make plays to help you win, and there's no doubt the best player for LSU is Flau'jae Johnson, and she comes to the line with the ability to tie and potentially take the lead for LSU, and she's not able to do it. She's 1 of 4 on her free throws there in the fourth quarter, including going 0 for 2 there in the final minute. Carolina gets the ball back. Raven Johnson had a phenomenal fourth quarter and a phenomenal game herself. Dishes the ball to Medina Okot, who gets the layup, who puts South Carolina in a position to basically seal the game at that point in time and go on and pick up the victory. So when it came down to the critical moments, Carolina's best players stepped up and LSU's weren't able to.
Yeah, so I mean full of Wiley in this game. 1 of 8 from deep, or 1 of 8 from the field in this game, 6 points, 0 of 3 from three-point range. You know, if she were on South Carolina, I wonder how much better her performance would have been, because the redemption game did not really go according to plan, I don't think, for her and LSU. But yeah, and that's the thing about South Carolina is I think they required performances from basically everyone on this roster that played, and they got them. Like, the bench really wasn't great in this game, but your starters provided everything you needed and so much more. I mean, Tessa Johnson going 4 for 5 from three-point range, Raven hitting a trio of threes. Really nice to see, and I think they just played really clean basketball. The other thing is only 9 turnovers in this game, because typically when you look at South Carolina, and I think this just kind of goes for women's basketball in general, there's typically double-digit turnovers for sure, maybe even sometimes into the 20s. I know that's happened a few times for the Gamecocks this year. The fact that it was in the single digits and you had nearly as many steals as you had turnovers, like you put it all together, you had more blocks and steals than you had turnovers in this game. That's really nice to see.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned Medina Okot. She's really coming to her own here as of late. This is her 3rd straight game with a double-double, and we talked about it going in to the weekend, that her presence at the post, considering the fact that LSU is the best offensive rebounding team in the country, was going to be vitally important. She went out there. Now, LSU did still win the rebounding battle 46-37, but Okot was grabbing rebounds when it matters, and obviously she was able to score in critical moments there late as well. So it's really nice to see her really kind of cementing herself in that role as a starter on this team, and obviously being clutch there at the end, again, scoring that key basket in addition to a couple free throws that really put the game out of reach there in the final minute.
And they need that type of player, right? They need someone in the post that's going to be able to get a ton of rebounds and create second chance opportunities for this team, because they had 12 points on second chances in this game. When you look at a 7-point difference by the end of the at the final buzzer, that makes a huge difference, and just a really nice performance all around for this team. And I think going into the final games of the regular season here, I think they're they've kind of taken out the big dogs at the end of this schedule here, right? They've beaten. They got Alabama coming up. I know that's another one. Like they've taken care of business against LSU. They clobbered Tennessee. They beat the brakes off of Vanderbilt a few weeks ago. Like they're playing their best basketball right now, and I really just don't know if there's anyone out there to really slow them down, at least from an SEC standpoint. The NCAA tournament, that's a whole different beast. But as far as the regular season and going into the SEC tournament goes, like this team is really in a good driver's seat right now, especially in the conference standings.
Well, and for what it's worth, you survived the toughest atmosphere you're going to see the entire year. You know, the rest of the regular season, not going to see anything like that. Greenville's in your backyard. You're going to have a lot of fans there for the FCC women's tournament. Obviously, the NCAA tournament is mainly at neutral sites once you get out of the first round, where you're likely to be first and second rounds, where you're likely to be hosting again. So you survived in the toughest environment. There's nothing the rest of the year that is going to match that in terms of a challenge for you.
So you have 4 games left in conference play. 3 of them are against ranked teams. You're at Alabama on Thursday, home versus Ole Miss on Sunday, home versus Missouri next Thursday, and then at Kentucky to round out the year on March 1st on a Sunday. You have a 2-game lead in the conference standings right now over Vanderbilt and Texas and Tennessee. And by the way, you have the head-to-head over all those teams. So it's really a 3-game lead in that sense. So South Carolina is in really good position to be the number 1 seed in the conference.
Yeah, barring just absolute disaster, which we don't expect. South Carolina should have no doubt about being the top seed going in the SEC Women's Tournament. No coin flip needed this time, thankfully. Not that we would do that anymore anyway, as they finally corrected that. But either way, we'll talk more about that and other things happening in Gamecock sports as we get into hour number 2 here in the game. Welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler Head, Jack Belcher, Chris Clark joining us now as we roll along on your Tuesday. I've already messed up once today, Chris, and said it's Monday, so if I make that mistake again, forgive me. Hopefully your weekend was wet, nice, Valentine's Day, and all that kind of stuff, and we're back to, I guess, kind of normal today.
Yeah, it was a good Valentine's Day. As I mentioned to you guys, all the wifey wanted to do, really, we cooked at home. Always great. And she wanted to watch USC LSU, women's basketball. So, benefits of a sports wife. And I got to watch that one. Didn't disappoint. Very entertaining game.
Phenomenal game.
Yep.
Yeah, lived up to the billing. I mean, that might be what Jack and I just talked about in the last segment, might be the best game of the entire year in terms of delivering for all four quarters. And again, you may see LSU again in Greenville or the NCAA tournament, but nothing's going to match the environment they were up against, there in Baton Rouge. Is always hostile, especially considering how this series has been the past handful of years. So, as we mentioned, you kind of passed your biggest test in terms of environment you're going to have to face, because you're not going to see anything like that for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I kind of like the way that Dawn Staley put it in the context. It was really in the context of Malaysia Fulwiley, where it was mentioned during the broadcast that Dawn Staley said, hey, the pressure of this is on her, right? A lot of Gamecock fans were kind of worried about it, a very similar dynamic to, what we always hear about with backup quarterbacks, right?
Yep.
Backup quarterback's going to kill us. What we saw when South Carolina men's basketball made the NCAA tournament, and boom, you're matched up against Jermaine Cousinard, and you go, all right, he's either going to score 2 points or like 40. And the latter ended up happening, playing Oregon in the first round and getting bounced. I think a lot of fans had this worry of, okay, Fulwiley now playing for LSU, she's going to be hungry. LSU, who had lost, 17 straight, I think, to South Carolina at that point, they're going to be hungry. It's in Baton Rouge. It was, credit where credit's due. It was a phenomenal environment. Wasn't there, but from what we saw, even on television, you could tell you had Holly Rose sitting back there with her sound meter up, the noise meter. It was like an SEC football game in there, super loud. But all the pressure, Dawn pointed out, was not on South Carolina, right? It was on LSU. And when it came time to make the big plays, when it came time to go close out the game and win, South Carolina did it. And it's really fascinating because, of course, if you go on social media, a lot of the LSU fans are saying, Flau'jae Johnson's 2 should have been a 3. Flau'jae Johnson missed 2 free throws. She doesn't which is true. She doesn't normally miss free throws. You can play that game all day long. You go to the first half. South Carolina, frankly, missed some bunnies. They missed some layups they could have hit. They missed shots too. LSU was hot in the first half in terms of making shots from the mid-range. South Carolina, Tessa Johnson, it seemed like she could have just pulled up from half court and made it in the first half, right?
Yeah.
So you can play that game all day long. As it turns out, South Carolina played with the most poise down the stretch. They got the stops they needed. They made the big shots that they needed down the stretch, and they were able to close it out with a big win. And guys, open up a 2-game lead in the SEC with just a few games left to play here.
Yeah, and that's what, Jack, you were talking about a moment ago. They've now kind of built themselves this buffer with only a handful of games to go that outside of some kind of catastrophe, they should have no problem locking up that number 1 seed. And again, as I mentioned, you're going to have a Greenville tournament right in your backyard once again, where you're going to have majority of the crowd there. So should you see LSU again coming up here in a couple weeks, it's going to be more of a pro-Carolina crowd more likely than not. They
could clinch this thing, the number 1 seed in the SEC tournament, probably within the next 2 games, I would think, because, they have a 2-game lead right now over Vanderbilt, Texas, and Tennessee, all teams that South Carolina has beaten this year. And I know Texas beat South Carolina early in the year, but that counts as a non-conference game since it was in Vegas at a tournament back during non-con play. And even with a 2-game lead, it's technically a 3-game lead in a lot of ways, as I mentioned before, because South Carolina has the head-to-head. So Texas, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee would all need South Carolina not just to lose twice, but they would need them to lose a third time. And given the fact that they're 25-2 on the year and 11-1 in conference play and have won 6 straight, I don't think we really see that happening. So South Carolina is in just about as good of a position as they could be to be able to lock this thing down, get the 1 seed in the conference tournament. No need for a coin flip this year, and they really should be in the driver's seat to also win the SEC tournament, since, like you said, Tyler, it's right down the road in Greenville, where they've had an enormous amount of success and an enormous turnout in terms of the fan base showing up.
You know, heading into this game this weekend, and College Game Day was there doing the 30-minute pregame leading into everything, which is always cool when South Carolina gets featured on that, usually when they play a team like LSU during the regular season. But there was a lot of conversation on if Carolina had lost, they could have potentially lost being a number 1 seed, which I didn't understand, because even without winning that game on Saturday, still would have been in control of the SEC, and they got a ton of really good wins on the resume. I'm not sure why they would have been looked at as anything other than a 1 seed, even if they had lost on Saturday. No, again, you win, you don't have to worry about that anymore. But interesting conversations around South Carolina's resume, which I think stacks up with just about anybody's out there this year.
It absolutely stacks up with anybody. I mean, look, and they had released the top 16, before this game. They talked about the top 4 and who right now is in prime position for the 1 seeds. And you look at 1, 2, like South Carolina's beat those teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at Vanderbilt, who did drop a close game to Georgia, missed a buzzer beater to tie it at the end. Vandy's one of the best teams in the country. South Carolina handled them, as we know, extremely well, and they're being talked about as a 1 seed. UConn, right? You got to put UConn as a 1 seed. They've been dominant. They've handled their business, everything that's been put in front of them. But their schedule is not what South Carolina's has been, right? So you look at South Carolina's schedule, even if you lose a game to a still very good LSU team, they had lost, 3 SEC games coming in, but still a very good LSU team on the road, tough environment. I don't see how you would adopt South Carolina. Because they could go out and run the table the rest of the way. They could go out and win the SEC. And in my mind, in the game of women's basketball, if you win the SEC, it would be hard. You'd be hard-pressed not to make a team the 1 seed, right, for winning the SEC. And then you could go out and win the SEC tournament, bolster your resume even further. I don't think this was a make or break by any means. South Carolina, I think, could still have lost this game and gone out and been very successful the rest of the season. Would it have been, could it have been a notch against them if the rest of the season you dropped another game or 2, or you somehow got bounced early in the SEC tournament? Sure. But it wasn't a make or break from the standpoint of you got to have this game to get a 1 seed. But the good news is you won it, and now you just further bolstered your case for actually getting that 1 seed. There's some business, of course, to take care of to finish out the regular season, and then in Greenville during the SEC tournament. But they're in prime position. They're exactly, where you would want to be if you're South Carolina.
Yeah, I think the thing with South Carolina is I think the resume is really good, and if they win out the rest of the way and they win the SEC tournament, they're going to get one of those 1 seeds. I can't really see, unless they just went on an utter collapse the rest of the way, which maybe would knock them out of the 1 seed in the conference right now. Maybe that would kind of screw up their chances to be a top seed, one of those top, number 1 seeds of the 4 teams that get there. But I think right now, even if they did lose a game or didn't win the SEC tournament, I think they're just about as good as any of those teams that are going to end up being a 1 seed. So it'd be surprising if the first, 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament aren't at Colonial Life Arena in March.
Well, and, when you look at resumes, you look at net rankings, and South Carolina's only had the opportunity to play 9 Quad 1 teams. They're 7-2, so their 2 losses have come against Quad 1 opponents. But when you group in Quads 1 and 2, South Carolina is 14-2 overall, UConn has 13-0 against quad 1 and 2. UCLA is 14-1 against quad 1 and 2, and Texas is 14-3 against quad 1 and 2. The next highest, once you go down to fifth in the net rankings, LSU is now 8-4. So those top four seeds have certainly set themselves apart in terms of having double-digit wins over quad 1 and 2 opponents, where I don't think there should be any debate on who the top four seeds are as of right now, unless one of them just completely falls off a cliff here over the course of the next couple weeks to wrap up the regular season.
Yeah, and it is difficult to envision really any of those falling off a cliff either. Now you never know. I mean, I didn't have, Georgia beating Vanderbilt in a regular season game either. But for South Carolina, they've done so much that you feel like they would have to, kind of do what I laid out earlier. You might have to drop, a couple regular season games to close it out. You may have to get bounced early in the SEC tournament in order to do that. But they've situated themselves quite well. All those teams have, right? They're pretty much, like I said, exactly where you want to be. Now you got to go take care of some business. You can't fall off down the stretch. And I think that's what it would take, to get bounced to a 2 seed, to lower your seeding status, to close out the rest of the season. It would probably take something pretty substantial like that to do it. They've built up quite the resume so far with what they've done.
Yeah, so again, South Carolina back in action, taking on Alabama coming up later on this week, and then Ole Miss coming up on Sunday. So a couple more tough challenges coming up here as they wrap up the regular season. But women's sports thriving as of right now. Men's sports still waiting to get them built back up from where they were a couple seasons ago. Ray Tanner on Saturday, after being honored at the baseball game, had some interesting comments about the state of men's sports and why it is what it is right now. We'll dive into that coming up next as the Garnet Trust Hour, presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating, rolls along. Tyler, Jack, and Chris on your Tuesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler Head, Jack Beltry, and Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday on the Game. Recapping everything that happened over the weekend, we focused on Gamecock baseball, what happened on the diamond, Gamecock women's basketball, what happened on the court. But there was a comment made over the weekend that got people pretty stirred up from former athletic director Ray Tanner. Of course, he was out there this weekend being honored along with Kip Balknight out there at Founders Park during opening weekend at Ray Tanner Field, of course. And when he was there, it allowed the media a couple minutes to talk to him about a lot of things going on. And I thought, Jack, you asked him a very good and important question, given where his position now as the former athletic director at South Carolina, about his thoughts on the current state of men's sports at Carolina under all the coaches that he had hired in those positions. And here is what Ray Tanner said in reference to where men's sports sit as of right now.
Well, the thing that, it is cyclical. I believe that. That it happens that way. There's ups and downs, and, we're talking about men's basketball this morning a little bit. One of my friends, and, just a couple years ago, Lamont won 26 games. So did he forget how to coach? No. Things happen, and, for whatever reason, not everybody, there's 16 teams in the SEC, and, not everybody can be in that mode. But I know tonight the men and women play at the same time at 8:30, so I follow it closely, and I live vicariously through what's going on. I love being here, and you want everybody to do well and to win, and you check the softball scores if you're not there, or you see how the equestrian team's doing. That's just what it's all about.
Jack, what was your reasoning for asking that question, and what did you think of that answer?
Well, the main reason, for the most part, that media availability was about the Hall of Fame, getting into the College Baseball Hall of Fame for Kip and Ray, which is a very big deal, and both those guys definitely deserve to be in. However, you can't help but, how often do we get to talk to Ray Tanner in media availability, right?
Not a lot these days.
This is, I think, probably one of the few times I've heard, to my knowledge, Chris, maybe you could chime in on this, but, I don't recall hearing much out of Ray since probably Jeremiah took over as the AD, and with a chance to ask a question, it has to be asked, what do you think about the current state of the athletics here at South Carolina, specifically the men's sports, because those are the three that have struggled the most. And yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask, and that's why I kind of threw it in there at the end as opposed to right at the start, because it's not the time and place to ask right away, but eventually you got to ask the question. Somebody had to.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question, a fascinating timing too, right? Just given the background, you've got Ray Tanner, who, wasn't just the AD here at South Carolina. There's that added layer. Ray Tanner, there were certainly some high moments in Gamecock baseball, before he got here, but he built that program into what all Gamecock fans want it to return to, or to the level where they're competing to have a chance to be what they once were. That doesn't mean winning 2 straight national titles, going to Omaha 3 times in a row. I don't think any fair fan expects that. But having a chance to go, South Carolina hasn't been back to Omaha in that time. They've been close a couple times, but fans want to go back to Omaha. They want to taste that level of success. And Ray Tanner, the reason that you guys were there talking to him yesterday and he was being honored was because he did that, right? At the same time, he was also the athletics director here for quite some time. And those coaches, Shane Beamer in football, Lamont Paris in basketball, Paul Maneri in baseball, they're Ray Tanner hires, right? So I think it would be interesting to ask that question to Ray Tanner, even if he had not built the baseball program, or, even if he was just kind of opining years later on the state of Gamecock athletics. Everybody would want to hear that answer, but he was also the AD and heavily involved and brought in, those coaches. And it's been such a topic of conversation among Gamecock fans, and not just, the struggles of last football season, which of course came after a really, really nice season for Gamecock football. It's not just the basketball program. It's not just the baseball program. It's all three of them at once. And fans want not just individually all those programs. They want all three of those programs to rise to the level that they feel like they're competing, on a regular basis. So I think, the answer, and I don't know what people expected, Jack, I don't know what you expected Ray Tanner to say. I certainly wouldn't expect him to go up and say, yeah, things are really bad. They're probably going to have to clean house. Like, I don't think in a setting like that, I don't think anybody would expect that answer. So I'm not surprised that he kind of gave the type of answer that he did, but there has been a lot of conversation about what he said, that it's cyclical. And I think to a degree that's true, right? Where you're going to have some ups and downs in your sports programs. I do get that. The problem is fans feel like they are on the wrong end of that cycle. You know what I mean? All too often in the last several years.
But it doesn't have to be cyclical, I think, is the thing that I think
that's what everybody's pointing out.
Like that's the main comment I've seen from this fan base when that comment was made by Ray. Like, I understand it. Like you are going to go through ups and downs, but I don't think South Carolina, an SEC program, it wasn't always this way, right? I mean, I've only covered this on this beat for so long, and I've heard of what South Carolina's done before, long before I even got to school here at South Carolina. But like, there were times where years where baseball, basketball, and men's basketball, baseball, and football, at least two of the three were always really good. Like 2010, 2011, 12, like basically the 2010s and 2000s, seemingly two of the three sports were always really good. And for it to be a point now where this is going to be, a year now where it's like all three were bottom of the SEC, like men's basketball in 23 or 24, 25 was the 16th, last place in the SEC standings in a really loaded SEC, and then baseball and football second to last. Like that shouldn't happen here at South Carolina, and I think that needs to change. And this is why Jeremiah Denai's job becomes really, really important, because if he wants to, I mean, financially it's going to be tough to move on from coaches, but he is the guy in charge now to make decisions, whether it's more funding for these programs or just doing something different, hiring, firing coaches. Like, he's got the power here now to make up for, let's call it for what it is. Like, some of these moves that Ray has made have just not been for the best for this athletics department.
Well, and it's significant to point out this is the former athletic director that is answering this question, because the answer of, well, it's just cyclical, kind of gives a shrug of his shoulders like, hey, there's only so much I can do about it. And if he was still the acting athletic director, I think we're hitting the panic button a little bit more there, because to a degree, he is right. And when he first started being an AD over a decade ago, there was a little bit of cyclicalness to the success of certain programs, just kind of depending on what your history is, your resources available, and all that kind of stuff. But in today's world and climate of college sports, getting back to the point that you said a moment ago, Jack, where it doesn't have to be, it can change for anybody. We just saw it with Indiana. The historic worst program in FBS football just became an undefeated national champion. It looks like they have no signs of slowing down because they changed the dynamic of what they had resources-wise, coaching-wise, and all that kind of stuff, to where their history had no bearing on what they were going to do this year. And Carolina sports is certainly capable of that. Again, you have a men's basketball team that, outside of a magical Final Four run in 2017, hasn't really done a whole lot. But that shouldn't be the reason why they're towards the bottom of the SEC. You have to invest. You have to have the right coach and all those kind of things working together, harmoniously to get you into position to be competitive. You were there a couple years ago, and I will continue to say that as time goes on, I think Lamont Paris getting this team into the NCAA tournament and competing for the SEC is looking more and more like a significant accomplishment, considering what these other three seasons have been, now that we know what the resources were stacked up to other teams in the SEC. So again, and maybe this kind of speaks to Ray Tanner's mindset as the athletic director the last couple years, as NIL and the portal and all those things were coming about, where he wasn't able to quite keep up, which is why making the move when they did to go to Jeremiah Donati was so critical. And again, these are still Ray Tanner hires that are coaching the men's teams as of right now. This is a critical year for all three of those sports. We'll see if Donati ends up having to make some very tough decisions. But again, I think it was very important that the decision and the change got made when it did a couple years ago now, because Donati is, again, a more new age athletic director that understands these things and seems to be trying to get all these sports to a very competitive space by allocating more resources to them, because that's what you need to compete these days.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we have to consider here, it's not as simple as let's fire all these coaches and move on. Like it's a big, especially with men's basketball coming up. This is going to be a really important decision for Donati, because it's a little over $12 million for the buyout for Lamont alone. If you fire him, you're also going to have to fire the staff. I don't know how much exactly that would cost, but it's going to be a little bit. Then you have to hire a new coach. Then you also, I think if you're moving on from Lamont and you're hiring a new coach, no coach is coming here without the definite commitment to having more funds to make this a competitive basketball program. What I mean by that is you have to have some funding somewhere in the middle of the SEC at least. And what exactly does that look like? Who knows? But this could end up being something that I'm not sure exactly what the total $1 million count would be by the end of it. But with all these different things you got to do to make the program better, you're probably looking at somewhere in the ballpark of like close to like $20-30 million. And that's a lot of money to commit. So you either do that or you just decide if you're Donati, like, hey, let's give Lamont even more resources, though. I don't know if what's the right decision here. You're gonna have it's something that is far above our pay grades here at 107.5, but that's what Jeremiah is in charge for in making this big decision.
And I think to the resources question, that's been a polarizing topic among Gamecock fans too. I think Jeremiah Donati in a short time has already shown that he's willing to pull some strings and push some buttons to help with that, right? The football program made from my covering that, they're investing heavily in this roster going into this season. We all know, and they played, I know this weekend didn't go, they did win the series. This weekend did not go how anyone wanted in terms of dropping a game, some of the issues we saw last season with runners in scoring position, all that stuff. But they did invest heavily in this team this offseason. So from a resource standpoint, I don't think there's that many questions that Donati will do that. It's about the coaching part going forward.
Again, that comment by Ray Tanner certainly getting everybody fired up. But again, he's not the athletic director anymore, so again, it'd be a lot more concerning if he still was saying those kind of things. And again, Jeremiah Donati seems to kind of understand this landscape, and we'll see if those results, or see if that push for resources yields any results here in the near future when it comes to men's sports. What's Kansas State going to do with Jerome Tang? How's that situation going to fall out? We'll discuss that coming up next on the Garnet Trust Hour here on the Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. It's our Ed, Jack Felcher, Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Gamecock men's basketball falls to Alabama over the weekend as they are now guaranteed to have a losing record in conference play, as we'll obviously see what decisions Jeremiah Donati has to make when it comes to Lamont Paris coming up here in a couple weeks. But the story of men's basketball as a whole revolves around the Kansas State Wildcats. They're in the midst of a 6-game losing streak out there in the Big 12, including a blowout loss last week at home to the Cincinnati Bearcats that prompted, at the time, head coach Jerome Tang to go on this rant.
This was embarrassing. These dudes do not deserve to wear this uniform. There will be very few of them in it next year. I'm embarrassed for the university. I'm embarrassed for our fans, our student section. You know, it is just ridiculous. We got practice at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we will get this thing right. I have no answer, no words. So y'all got 2 questions. So whoever want to ask 2 questions, I'll answer them to the best of my ability right now. But right now, I'm pissed.
Jerome Tang rightfully upset with how his team's performance was last week. They would proceed to get blown out by number 3 Houston over the weekend as well. Jerome Tang, though, has been fired, and the Kansas State University is viewing those comments as grounds for cause to avoid paying him nearly $19 million in buyout by saying he embarrassed his players, threw them under the bus, and all those kind of things. Basically saying, hey, you were mean to your players, and now we don't have to pay you your buyout. I'm interested to see how this one holds up in court, guys.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a little bit foolish for Kansas State to fire him. Like, if they want to fire him just because, okay, sure, like, Kansas State really hasn't been worth much of anything since they went to the Elite Eight a few years ago in Tang's first season. Ever since then, just has not been great. Firing him with cause for these comments, I don't think that's going to hold up in court. I think Kansas State is ultimately going to have to pay him his buyout. And look, it's been a rough year for Kansas State, and maybe he didn't need to. I think we've seen a lot lately these last few weeks of a lot of coaches kind of throwing their players under the bus and really being critical of them. And now we're seeing coaches like Tang getting fired because of that. I think that's a little extreme in my opinion. But that doesn't mean it's okay for those comments to be made publicly. You want to make that to your players behind closed doors. Do whatever you need to do to help them make them a better team. But, saying that out there to the media wouldn't necessarily be the way I'd go about it. But I also don't think it's fine for Kansas State to fire him with cause and not have to pay a buyout because of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels to these firings, right? You think about some of the coaches that have been dismissed in the past, not for on-field results, but just for something else that happened, right? Like Hugh Freeze at Auburn, right? He's been through both of these type things. When you think about a football example, at Auburn, he was fired for the on-field. At Ole Miss, he was fired for the off-field. Like, there was a lot of on-field success, but you had these other things, we could say, that came up off the field, and you go, hey, got to pull the trigger on a firing, right? With Tang, and Jack, you mentioned the Elite Eight run. I mean, remember, he was a hot commodity, like, not that long ago when he got that job. People were saying, hey, this guy's going to rebuild the Kansas State program into what it's been in the past at times. Frank Martin was there, had a similar run. A different situation because you don't see things leaking. You haven't even seen anything leaked out, and maybe K-State will use this as part of their strategy about, things that happen in practice or mistreatment of players. You don't see any of that. This is, to me, without being on the K-State beat, pretty clearly, hey, the results have been crummy. We need to let this guy go. Oh, we got this big buyout. How can we try not to pay it? Oh, well, he just had some mean things to say about the players, right? There's an additional layer to this, too. Jerome Tang has hired himself a couple attorneys. One of them, Tom Mars, who has been involved with, all sorts of stuff in sports law, NIL, representing coaches. Here's his quote. If K-State's president and AD really think the school was embarrassed by recent events, that's nothing compared to the embarrassment that both of them are about to experience. And they've already been on record. Are you planning on filing a lawsuit? Yes, absolutely, but we're going to give them time to cool down, right? So, if you had to guess, guys, does this thing end up, like you said, Jack, with Jerome Tang getting his full buyout? Does it end with some type of settlement? For K-State, it was probably hey, here's this button. Let's see if we can try to push it. Oh, that didn't work. This is pretty clearly to me just like we need to move on from an on-court results standpoint. Let's see what else we can do here. Going to be fascinating to watch it play out, but I'm with y'all. It's hard for me to see this holding up with them being able to, to fire this guy with cause, right? The only cause here was he didn't win enough games, it seems like.
So what Kansas State's going to argue in court is 3 specific clauses in Jerome Tang's contract. The 9th clause, which states the coach must conduct themselves at all times in a manner consistent with position of head coach, instructor, student athletes, blah, 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 blah. 10th clause, which states the coach must be establishing, maintaining, and enforce standards of conduct, disciplinary rules, and sanctions fairly and uniformly for the team, student athletes to ensure academic and moral integrity while encouraging excellence. And the 11th clause, which says Tang must be engaging in and actively monitoring to ensure the program's coaches and employees are engaging in fair, safe, and responsible treatment of the team, student athletes, and avoiding behavior actions, all that kind of stuff. Again, that's very open-ended. I don't think that's going to hold up very well on K-State's end of this. And plus, this is the thing I think I've seen a lot of people bring up. Ari Wassman of On 3 made this point. These guys are getting paid too. Like, this isn't 15 years ago where these guys just getting scholarships and the opportunity to play. Like, a lot of these guys are making more than probably the assistant coaches on this team. And when you're getting paid a lot of money and you're not performing, guess what? You're subject to criticism.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Jack. Yeah, Andy Kennedy pointed this out the other day. He around this same time, I can't remember the stat, but he's like, we missed like half of our like, is it too much to ask to make your layups? These guys are getting paid a lot of money, right? So you can't just start, we can't advance from players can be criticized and they're playing for a scholarship to they're getting paid and now you can't criticize them at all, right? There is a line. And this happens all the time, right? Schools can try to use it or not. You can't get in the business of trying to use that as an excuse to fire. So there's obviously a line there, but just saying something in the press conference like, hey, we got to play better. These guys don't deserve to wear the uniform. Like there's a line there that, there's no evidence that Tang has really crossed.
Like, I think it's okay to be a little critical. You, like you said, Chris, you got to kind of toe that line a little bit of not being kind of like super outlandish, I think, in the comments that he made. Like, I don't think it's necessarily okay for him to just say, like, yeah, like these guys don't deserve to wear the uniform. But, yeah, they are, let's call it for what it is. They are professionals in a lot of ways. They are free agents that came to this university and they are being paid to perform. And when you don't, you are subject to criticism to some degree, but I think that needs to happen more in practice and behind closed doors as compared to, let's publicly just throw all these guys under the bus and you kind of lose the team in that sort of way.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in court. I think, again, Jerome Tang's got a very good case here, and we'll see how well K-State argues their side of things and what that means for coaches being able to criticize players going forward on bad teams. We'll come back. We'll wrap up the hour, revisit the headlines from Friday. How did Jack and I do in predicting what happened over the weekend? With that next to wrap up the Garnet Trust Hour, presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Tyler Head, Jack Feltry, Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Recapping everything from the weekend because, of course, we were not here yesterday. And Chris, typically on Mondays, well, typically on Fridays, Jack and I do our predict the headline for the weekend. And then on Monday, we come in and react to whatever headlines were, see if we got them right or not. So we're bumping this to Tuesday. So we'll include you in this as well. If you would have had to guess a headline going into the weekend, what would you have predicted, and would it have eventually come true?
Yeah, I mean, I had two that rolled through my head. If I may cheat,
Sure.
The first one, and this isn't my number one. This is my number two. My first one would have been South Carolina sweeps Northern Kentucky. Game 3, the bats heat up, right? You know, game 1, game 2, kind of hit or miss. You had some issues. You did enough. You left some guys on base. Remember Paul Maneri saying after game 2, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if we came out really hit well in game 3. That certainly was obviously not the case, in scoring 2 runs and losing that game at the end. Had a chance to win at the end, didn't. But that would, honestly, I thought they would take care of business, sweep Northern Kentucky, have a pretty good weekend at the plate. That I would have whiffed on that one. My number one, though, would have been that South Carolina scores a big win on the road in Baton Rouge against LSU, and Kim Mulkey takes it to 18 straight, drives all that conversation. That would have been my top headline, that the Gamecocks take down the Tigers in Baton Rouge.
My headline was similar to that. I predicted Carolina winning in overtime of that game. Now, if Flau'jae Johnson makes some free throws in that final minute, maybe we do end up getting that. And, hey, good for South Carolina. They weren't the game didn't have to get pushed to overtime. And again, you had great performances in the fourth quarter by Raven Johnson, Badina Okop. But I was close on my headline. Thankfully, it didn't have to come true because Carolina still walked out of there with the victory in 18 in a row anyway. But I was feeling good about that because it looked like we were heading towards that there in the late stages. But hey, even at home, sometimes those free throws can be a little bit too much for even some of the best players like Flau'jae Johnson.
Yeah, and as far as my predictions for the weekend go, my storyline was more so on. I think I did say that South Carolina was going to sweep Northern Kentucky, which did not happen. But I know the main prediction was on the Olympic side of things with USA men's hockey, and also shout out to USA women's hockey playing Canada for a potential gold medal. But in terms of the men's side, I did say that the U.S. was going to sweep through the weekend, remain perfect through the round-robin pool play, whatever you want to call it, and they did just that. Picked up wins over Latvia on Thursday, Denmark on Saturday, and then Germany on Sunday. Really dominant performances against those 3 countries, and the big, I think this is ultimately going to come down to the U.S. and Canada at the end of the day. Maybe you see like a Finland or a Sweden potentially competing for a chance to, be top 3, maybe get a bronze medal. But I think this is ultimately going to come down to the U.S. and Canada, and the U.S. plays on Wednesday as they await the winners of the other qualifying rounds to start competing for a chance to, be on the stand at the end.
Yeah. Again, they won the 3 games over the weekend. Now they wait. It's quarterfinals that start tomorrow, correct?
I'm trying to pull up like a bracket.
Well, so now, Chelsea and Denmark are playing.
Yeah, I'm looking at it is a quarterfinal for Wednesday.
And is the winner of that taking on America, or is that Canada? We don't have a specific bracket.
Yeah,
here.
finding a specific bracket online is very tough and confusing for some reason. So, not sure exactly who they'd play, but it would be Wednesday night. I'm sorry. Yeah, wait. No, 3 o'clock here.
3 o'clock here, 9 o'clock their time.
Yes. So, the gold medal game would be on Sunday.
Yes, and then the women play the gold medal game Thursday at 1:10 against Canada.
Yeah. So.
And they've already beaten them once.
No, yeah. I mean, they shut them out if I'm remembering correctly. It was like 5-0, I think. So, yeah. I mean, the U.S. and you kind of hope that's the case against Canada here. Canada's roster is just so stacked. I mean, their first line with guys like Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby, it's just insane. But the U.S. is a really good team, too, and it's going to be real interesting pinning these two against each other. We know how entertaining the Four Nations was last year when the U.S. and Canada were going up against each other. Now, hopefully we'll get that here rather soon.
Yeah, how many, 4 fights in the first 9 seconds in that game? Something like that?
Yeah.
But yeah, we went, by the way, guys. And hopefully we will, of course, I'll be rooting for the U.S. if they make it to that game, face off again. I'm rooting for them the whole way. I do like a good hockey fight, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
I like U.S. had a classic. What game was that, Jack? They had that classic goal. It's been replayed.
Oh, wow. Miracle from 1980.
No. Recently. They had a great goal in this tournament. I mean, they've had some bangers.
Yeah.
But I went down this year to see the Charleston minor league hockey team, the South Carolina Stingrays, and we had a great time, but there wasn't a fight, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, when I go to a hockey game,
not always though.
there's not always, but the Stingrays got down. I mean, shout out to that organization. Their game experience was really, really cool. I mean, it really was. If you've never been, go check it out. Give them a free plug here. But we went down, and the Stingrays got down. They were a little frustrated. There were a couple they're starting up, and then, they got broken up. No fights.
I love the fact.
I like a good fight in hockey.
I love the fact that fighting's never left hockey. As insane as that sounds in 2026, it gives the game charm.
It's just because, the refs just step back.
Yeah.
They're just kind of skating around a little bit, kind of keeping an eye on the situation.
We had the stadium series the other week where we had the goalies fighting each other.
Yeah, that's right.
That was awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
And nice to see. And it looks like it may come down to America and Canada once again on the men's side of things. And, it's kind of par for the course because Canada got the better of them in the Four Nations. So hopefully they have the opportunity to get their lick back here.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to watch. And again, I mean, maybe like Finland or Sweden, one of these other countries makes a little run here. But yeah, this is probably going to come down to the U.S. and Canada, as it should be. And it's going to be a really interesting rest of the week here to see who ends up top 3 in terms of the, making the medal round.
We'll see what happens, and we'll talk about it as the week rolls along. That'll do it for the Garnet Trust Hour, presented by Krantz Cooling and Heating. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, up next on your Tuesday on the Game.
All right, everybody, let's tell you about our friends over at Krantz Cooling and Heating. As always, our presenting sponsor here on the Game for the Garnet Trust Hour. Scheduled to be out at my home today. Justin Krantz, general manager there, his team, since 1983, family-owned and operated, serving families and businesses around the Midlands. Anything that you need for your HVAC needs, they've been to my home and Wes's. You can trust them to come out to yours, too. Check out their website. KrantzCooling.com, Krantz, cooling with a K, KrantzCooling.com. That's where you can learn more about their financing options and what they can do for you. AC, heating, improving your indoor air quality, repair, maintenance, and installation. They can do it all for you. KrantzCooling.com. It's Krantz with a K, Krantz, cooling with a K.com, or 803-672-3224.
11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Just Tyler Head and Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday. Wes Mitchell going to stretch out the long weekend a little bit longer, but should be back in here with us coming up tomorrow. We'll give him that time. It's okay. We'll allow it for now.
Well, we will allow it. There will be a punishment.
There will be eventually, but we all have to. We all got to take our time. So yeah, we'll get him back in here tomorrow, and we'll have plenty to talk about, as we have had plenty to talk about this morning so far. This weekend, very busy. We touched on men's basketball when you jumped in with us at 10 o'clock, but of course, our big focus on Friday. And again, thank you to everybody that came out and hung out with us over at Village Idiot Pizza, getting set for opening day of baseball. By the way, the buffalo chicken pizza, phenomenal. Brought home.
You're still thinking about that?
I'm still thinking about it. I brought home because here's the thing: between that and what our guy TK Sam brought us, I had so much leftover food on Friday. Our Grayson, our guy that was teching the event for us, he had to leave. He's driving up to Richmond, I think, so he couldn't take any food with him. So I just had all this pizza and all this Chinese food left over, and I brought a bunch to Terry. Then I took a bunch home, and I told my wife, I'm like, hey, we've got leftover pizza for dinner, and at some point this weekend we have Chinese food that we ended up eating yesterday, Sunday, I guess.
Oh, man. Yeah, I should have. Now I'm like, I should have taken more, because I kind of felt like I took some pizza, and then I was like, I don't want to take too much. I don't want to be that guy, like boxing up all the food, but it was you.
Yeah, it ended up being
somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it. And listen, shout out to Brian Glenn, because even reheated, that pizza's still phenomenal. So, yeah.
Now, are you, Tyler, when you reheat pizza, are you an oven reheater or a microwave reheater? Or just kind of like depends on the timing of it all?
I typically go air fryer. Because I had so much, I had to do it in the oven just to get it all done at once. But if it's just me and I have leftover pizza, if it can fit in the air fryer, that's the thing. Some pieces of pizza are too big to fit in the air fryer. But if it can fit in there, it only takes a couple minutes, gets it nice and crispy, gets the cheese melted again. If you don't know this about me, I love the air fryer. The air fryer is my go-to for everything. I mentioned I cooked some sirloin steaks for Valentine's Day over the weekend in the air fryer, and they were incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to need to get some, I'm consider myself a pretty decent to good cook. And the air fryer, though, sometimes is my foil, because like I'll put stuff in there, which seems weird, right? It seems like it's pretty dummy proof. Sometimes I'll put stuff in there and I'm like, okay, that is way too done. I feel like I would burn the Village Idiot pizza in the air fryer, and then I'd be very disappointed.
You gotta watch it really closely. I'm not opposed to opening the little door constantly throughout the cook time, because sometimes it doesn't need the full time. But yeah, if you need recommendations for air fryer cooking, I got you. It's become my main form of cooking things.
You get the air fryer cookbook from Tyler Head?
Yes. Hey, I could write it. Honestly, I could. Okay. Again, everybody came out and saw us at Village Idiot on Friday, getting set for Gamecock baseball to open their season. And, as you mentioned, they won the series, which, hey, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. It wasn't the most convincing wins. Pretty solid outing on Friday. Had to have the late game heroics from KJ Scobie in game number 2. And then Saturday, they just didn't really show up at all. Of course, Coach Maneri had his comments in terms of the team being tired from playing 18 innings on Friday. So it doesn't make us feel great coming away from weekend number 1. Again, there's a lot of baseball left to be played. A few weeks until you get into the really tough competitions against teams like, Clemson and, of course, SEC play. But, you survived weekend number 1, but I don't think it gave us the utmost confidence that this team is drastically different than they were a year ago, at least not right now.
Well, here's the thing. If this was year 1 or last year didn't happen, a lot more people would probably be saying, it's baseball, right? It's a long season. It's baseball. You won the series. Yeah, you hate you dropped a game, but it's the opener, right? Here's the problem. This is why it's been such a topic of conversation. There's a couple things in here, I think, that you started to outline. Number 1, you have basically, for lack of a better term, you have like a PTSD from last year where it did not go well for the entirety of the season. You had a historically poor season. We all know that. You rebuilt the team. A big problem, and there were many last year, but a big problem was not being able to push across enough runs. Didn't seem like any lead was safe. Runners in scoring position was just a constant conversation last year. Coming out of the weekend, you didn't score. Even in the wins, you feel like, you left some things on the table. And if you go back, and I don't have the stat in front of me, runners in scoring position for the weekend, I know Jack had some stuff on that.
4 for 30.
4 for 30. Okay, there you go. Ugly, right?
Yeah.
Not good. End of game, you got some guys on base. You had arguably your best hitter, guy who won the previous game for you, up to bat, couldn't push it across. But you also feel like, okay, it shouldn't come down to that against Northern Kentucky. You should be able to just win the game before you get to the bottom of the ninth inning. So you've got those things, right? And so now, instead of just having a disappointing series where some things didn't go well, and maybe you're saying, okay, is it just baseball? Can things improve? You're kind of looking back and viewing it through the lens of last year. And you're starting to wonder, even through 3 games, are things really going to be better? Now, I do think you have to back up, and you do have to bake some of that in, that it is just the first series. Fortunately, you didn't drop that series, and you're probably fortunate to not have dropped it. And you're going to progress throughout the year, and we'll see how it goes. It's too early right now. Even if South Carolina had swept the series and looked great, you wouldn't be sitting here going, oh, yeah, we're sweeping Clemson. We're going to finish it, that we're going back to Omaha. Like, if anything, the only thing that we were going to learn this weekend is that there's a lot to work on if they had lost the series or otherwise kind of struggled. And there were some struggles, particularly runners in scoring position, that you didn't want to see. And I think the next layer is just what you said, Tyler. Maneri's comments, and a lot of people pointed out, hey, the other team played a doubleheader too, and that's very fair. And, you've got a kind of a split between people when Paul Maneri says, I didn't have him ready to play today. I think on one hand, that's what people want to hear. They want to hear the coach taking accountability. On the other hand, they're going, why weren't they ready to play? Right. Yeah. So certainly you can't project what happened in weekend 1 to the entire rest of the season. But were there enough things there that were concerning that has your antenna up and going, all right, you can't go 4 for 30 when you go play Clemson or when you get into SEC play? I mean, that's very, very valid.
Yeah, and look, they're not the only SEC team that dropped a game in opening weekend. Florida lost to UAB. Georgia lost to Wright State, who comes from the same league as Northern Kentucky. So you're not the only one that didn't come out of the weekend completely unscathed, and that's okay. You still won the series at the end of the day, which, if we're going to pick one thing, that's the most important. And as much as you did struggle at the plate throughout the weekend, there were some things that you saw that were positive. I thought Tyler Bach obviously had an incredible game in game number 2 and pushed across those 2 runs to tie it that set up KJ Scobie for his eventual walk-off homer there in the bottom of the ninth. Saw good things out of Thomas LeCroy in game number 1. Moore in game number 3 had a really solid outing. He's kind of the only one that really was hitting the ball there. So you kind of saw these pockets of success from guys that are going to be important for this team going forward this year. It's just keeping it sustained throughout, obviously, an entire series and going forward is going to be really, really important. And that being said, for the offense, the pitching was really solid. And I thought, like Riley Goodman, because he was perhaps the most anticipated player going into the weekend, considering the fact that he'd never played a college game or started a college game before. Solid outing, got into a little bit of trouble there towards the end of his run, but went 3 2/3, gave up 4 hits on 70 pitches with 5 strikeouts. Very solid, all things considered. Josh Gunther came in and did exactly what Coach Maneri said he was probably going to do and give you long relief, and basically almost took you to the very end of the game there. Phillips, a decent outing in game number 2. Brandon Stone, solid in game number 3. So I thought pitching, all things considered, did relatively well this weekend, despite the fact the offense is still trying to figure things out, it seems like.
Yeah, I think, again, in the opening weekend, not the competition level's only going up from here. And maybe we get to the end of the season and say, hey, Northern Kentucky's a really good mid-major program. I don't know if we'll say, maybe it'll be the opposite. Maybe they really struggle throughout the course of the year. Such a transfer-heavy, new-look team for Northern Kentucky, too. We talked about this with Stuart Lake, that it's kind of hard to know what they had and how good they might be going into this season, too. But pitching-wise, I think, big question coming in because you've got new faces. You've got guys stepping into new roles. You've got transfers. You don't have McCoy, as we've talked about plenty. But I think you, for the most part, liked what you saw there. Again, baking in the competition level, it was really just the hitting that causes you the most concern. 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position. Pulling up some other stuff here from some of Jack's pieces on Gamecock Central. 10 for 47 with runners on base in general. And the top 6 batters in the lineup, 2 for 25 at one point against the pitching staff. So, those things, if you were concerned about those, that is entirely fair. It doesn't mean it'll be that way the rest of the year. But is there some concern because you did have struggles on the opening weekend against a team that is not going to be up to par with Clemson, we think, and some of the, certainly in the SEC schedule? Yeah, right to be concerned for that. But the pitching, I think if you take on the whole, that was the bright spot of the weekend.
Yeah, and, good pitching can hold you down for a while your offense tries to figure things out. Again, what you are in week number 1 or series number 1 at least isn't always indicative of what you are by, week 8, 9 or whatever. And you do have a couple weeks to ramp things up before you get into the thick of obviously playing Clemson, not this weekend, but next weekend, and, of course, conference play. So hopefully this is the anomaly and not the rule because, again, we have a lot of hope and optimism that this team is able to take some steps forward and be better than they were a year ago. That doesn't guarantee you anything, but here's hoping starting tonight as you take on Wofford up there in Spartanburg that things kind of get back on the right track from an offensive standpoint. You got Gardner Webb tomorrow, and then you got the Surface Academies coming in this weekend. So a lot of baseball to be played, and hopefully those fatigue issues have been worked out in the past couple days because, again, you got 5 games over the course of the next roughly 6 days starting today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing that probably Gamecock fans are talking about the most is just the whole, it's not going to be your only doubleheader. You're going to be stacking weekend series with midweeks, so hopefully that's an issue that is not lingering, going into the remainder of the season. So, another thing, Tyler, is really, and Wes brought this up at Village Idiot last week, the one thing that this program did well last year was they generally took care of business in these. Now, it didn't end up helping them because of how poor they were in conference play. But I think this year, if you're South Carolina, if you were going to make a play to get back into the tournament, host a regional, all the goals that you have in mind, you do have to go take care of these midweek type games, and you don't need to, you got to stack some series wins. Everybody's got eyes on the Clemson series. That's one everybody wants. One of the greatest rivalries in college baseball. They had a really good, the Tigers did, opening weekend. So, yeah, a lot to correct, a lot to get better on as they move into the meat of the schedule here soon.
Again, back in action tonight, taking on Wofford up in Spartanburg. First pitch at 5:30. Pregame coverage on our sister station, 98.5 WOMG, begins at 5:15. Then back over at Founders Park tomorrow, taking on Gardner Webb for a 4 o'clock first pitch back here on 107.5 The Game. We'll dive back into perhaps one of the biggest events of the entire weekend, that being women's basketball, taking on LSU on the road. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
I think this team sees the end of the tunnel, meaning they know we're at the end of the season, so it's a little bit easier to just focus in on what we have in front of us. And this was a big one. This was a huge game in front of us, huge game on the road, and just a hostile environment, very, very NCAA tournament-like. And we just found a way to win. And I think this team is finding ways to win, a lot of different ways, and especially when we, I don't usually say this, but especially when we're not fully healthy.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head and Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. That the voice of Dawn Staley recapping her team's 79-72 victory over number 6 LSU on Saturday night, saying the team sees the light at the end of the tunnels. They're approaching the end of the regular season, now in sole possession of first place in the SEC. And as we mentioned in the last hour, barring just completely tripping up here in these last couple games, should have no problem locking up the number 1 seed heading into the SEC Women's Tournament, which they look to win once again this year to springboard them into the NCAA Tournament. And look, this game was every bit as entertaining as it was built up to be, comes all the way down to the end. And this is one of those games, though, where your best players have to step up. We saw that for South Carolina. Raven Johnson, Medina Okot having big fourth quarters. Tessa Johnson obviously went out there and had a phenomenal game, especially early where she was hitting everything that she seemed to put up in the air. Flau'jae Johnson, no doubt one of the best players in women's basketball, no doubt the best player for LSU's team. When the ball was in her hands late, though, some critical mistakes, including missing a couple of free throws that making one would have tied the game, making two would have taken the lead in the final minute. Raven Johnson takes the ball down the court, feeds it to Medina Okot, who makes the layup, gets her free throws, and ultimately salts the game away at that point in time. But again, it came down to the very last minute between two of the best teams, not only in the SEC, but in the country.
The thing that keeps running through my mind, which has been talked about a lot in Gamecock land on social media, and I hate to give too much attention, but this has to be called out because it's a freezing cold take type of thing. There was the random person on social media who had the post that has been ratioed, which is, something to the effect of LSU's not losing to a team with Tessa Johnson in the starting lineup. It's like, tell me you don't watch basketball, without telling me. It's, Tessa Johnson, to your point, Tyler, has been a leader of this team and is someone they've counted on so much offensively. And she was brilliant, and created, not only the ability to go back and point out how truly stupid a post like that was. It is just one person, right? People say a lot of really dumb things, but created the viral moment of Kim Mulkey saying, who can guard Tessa, and a freshman on LSU, Bella Hines, who is a big-time recruit and I think is going to be really, really good. I mean, Kim Mulkey said after the game she's got to play more, and she's probably right. Was the only one, I think, from what we saw that raised her hand and certainly put forth a valiant effort, at least trying in the second half against Tessa. But Tessa was brilliant. Like you said, she feel like she could have pulled up from anywhere. She kind of did. Made her shots. Made some huge shots just kind of when South Carolina really needed them, it seemed like, in the flow of the game. When LSU was up, she really kept them in it with their shooting. But Tessa's always been a really good player, right? She's versatile defensively. She's got a mid-range game. She's gotten, I think, even better as a shooter. This is a player, Tyler, that you go back to when South Carolina beat Iowa and won a national championship. She scored 19 points in that game off the bench in 25 minutes. And there's a reason she has the tournament Tessa moniker. I mean, she seems to really up her game and raise her level of play when the team really, really needs it. And you can even just watch her on the court, during the huddles, after dead balls, after plays. She and Raven Johnson really driving that bus in terms of leadership. And Raven, I mean, there's so many performances to call out, but Raven was absolutely, I think, brilliant as well.
It's crazy. I heard Elijah and Preston talking about this, assuming and hoping that this team can make another deep run. Like, Raven Johnson could legitimately spend her entire career going to Final Fours. I think she won 4 straight state basketball championships in high school as well. She just has a pedigree of knowing how to win. And again, on Saturday, as the focus got turned to Tessa Johnson, Joyce Edwards and Tania Latson didn't have quite the same effect on this game as they had in games past. The ball was put in Raven Johnson's hands to go out there and make plays, and sometimes it was her making a bucket, sometimes it was her assisting and passing the ball to like Okot there in the final minute to really help salt the game away, but she went out there and performed flawlessly, and again, she's maybe played some of the most total games of anybody in women's college basketball as of right now, and she's somebody that when you have to rely on her is always going to go out there and get the job done.
Well, and she's improved as a shooter. You know, it was pointed out going into the second half, what between the two Johnsons, between Raven and Tessa, what they have 7 threes, I think. So Raven, from, you know, her early part of her career when Caitlin Clark's waving her off, you know, basically saying she can't shoot, to now where, you know, she's up in the, I think, 30s in terms of percentage, you know, mid to higher 30s in terms of three-point shooting. That's become a legitimate threat for her to where you can't just sag back and, you know, hope she shoots. She can make them now. She's progressed that part of her game. Defensively, she's super tough. And she's just such a heady player. I mean, there's a reason that Dawn Staley, I mean, think about all the players that Dawn Staley has coached in her career at South Carolina. I mean, some of just the faces of women's basketball. And Dawn Staley has said, you know, she's probably going to miss Raven more than any other player. I mean, that really says something. So, you know, when you watch Raven Johnson, and I think this weekend was a great example of that, you know, her game's not necessarily flashy. She just gets the job done, and she's such a good, you know, I think Dawn Staley has an appreciation for how Raven runs the point because Dawn Staley was also a guard and handled the ball and always wants a strong point guard in her offense. She just does such a great job structuring the offense, knowing when to push, knowing when to settle things down in the half court, truly running the offense and running the show. And her experience level is something you just can't replicate it. And I think it's really hard to replicate her skill set and her IQ for the game too.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And look, this game, again, lived up to the hype, gave you everything you kind of wanted and were hopeful going in. Malaysia Fulwiley didn't end up having that profound of an impact on this game, and she was obviously one of the big storylines heading in with her transfer to LSU in the offseason. She ends up going 1 of 8, ends up turning the ball over a couple times. Kind of gave you the Malaysia Fulwiley experience of having great moments and having some head-scratching moments. And again, there doesn't seem to be any ill will or bad blood or anything like that. They were you know, kind to each other in pre and post game and all that kind of stuff. We understand the reasons of why Malaysia Fulwiley left, but that ended up kind of being secondary as this game went along for what was kind of billed as maybe the main storyline going in.
Well, you know, and I think it was interesting. I turned on the game, and look, I'm not, far be it from me to criticize like her decision or families. Like everybody does what they feel like is best, but for me, Tyler, just looking at it from my view, I'm like, all right, what has really changed about the situation there? You know, I mean, maybe there's NIL related things. I don't know, but Malaysia Fulwiley didn't start this game. I think she started some this year, right?
Right.
But she didn't start in this game. You know, she was pressing some. She had a steal of Raven Johnson early in the game. Like she had some good passes. She did some good things. But she had a few turnovers early, certainly didn't have her best game. We know she's capable of more than that. She's shown she's capable of more than that at South Carolina and at LSU. But I do think, you know, for South Carolina and for fans, certainly, there had to be some sweetness to this one to beat that team with Fulwiley. And I think Dawn Staley did a great job of not making that the focus. You're not playing one player. You're playing an entire team, an entire program. And like I said, you know, last hour, Dawn Staley pointed out that the pressure is on Fulwiley. The pressure is on LSU to overcome, you know, this losing streak. And South Carolina made the plays when they needed to make them. And they didn't make one player, you know, kind of rule the day. There's a little bit of a Carson Beck, Georgia effect too, Tyler. You noticed when Fulwiley came on the court, you know, the broadcasters didn't lean into it. Like there were no like problems with how Fulwiley was treated at South Carolina or anything like that. But it was like, okay, playing her former team, all that kind of stuff. But South Carolina just played so well that they made it not as big of a factor as it could have been.
Yeah, and again, picked up huge wins. Still got a couple more tests to close out the regular season, but definitely survived their toughest test of the entire season as far as an environment goes down there in Baton Rouge. And again, we'll talk about their matchup with Alabama a little bit later on this week. We'll come back, continue on with the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Some changes to the South Carolina coaching staff. One coach on the way out and one familiar name joining the staff for this upcoming season. We'll talk about that next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. I read Chris Clark along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Again, we've talked about all the on-court and on-diamond action, from over the weekend, which has taken most of the focus when it comes to Gamecock athletics. Something that may have slipped through the cracks, though, is the changes to the Gamecock football coaching staff that occurred over the weekend. The most notable of those being Jody Camillus, as he is now headed back to the NFL to take on the same role as special teams coordinator for the new regime with the Las Vegas Raiders. Clint Kubiak takes over for Pete Carroll, who was there for one season. Of course, Jody came from the NFL, spent a long time with the Broncos, was with the Rams as well, before coming to South Carolina, being the special teams coordinator. And Chris, obviously special teams is a big deal around here at South Carolina, and there's no doubt this is a significant loss for an area of the team that, despite being 4-8, was actually pretty solid, all things considered, last year.
Yeah, I've seen some, posts and things like that in the aftermath of this. South Carolina wasn't very good on special teams. And, if you go back and actually look, I don't really think that was the case. I mean, Mason Love had a really good year. They were a good bit better in the return game. They made some changes this offseason to bring in, another snapper, Emmett Rhodes, through the portal. Brought in another kicker in Upton Beliphant to compete with Max Kelly after losing William Joyce this past season. Could things be better? Absolutely. Wes and I sat down with Shane Beamer recently, and one of the things he brought up to us was, hey, we felt like we were really good on special teams in the first half of the season and not as good in the back half. And so every year we know how much Shane Beamer cares about special teams. That's something they're going to take a hard look at regardless of the coach. But you're right, Tyler. Jody, I don't think this is a situation where he was, actively looking for an exit. I don't think it was a situation where Shane Beamer was, looking to make a change. There were no indications either way of that. But you pointed out exactly the case. I mean, Jody has an extensive background in the NFL. This is his first college job, aside from being an assistant to Steve Sarkisian at Texas in 2023. From 1991 to 2022, Jody coached in the NFL, as a special teams, started as an assistant special teams coach, kind of a quote unquote off-field guy, got his first full-time job with the Giants in, I think, 1993, and had his entire career up until 2023 in the NFL game. So you had to kind of figure with his experience, at some point, does somebody else from the NFL reach out? Does he look to go back? And that's what's happened here. My understanding is Jody has some connections to the Kubiak family with their new head coach, Clint Kubiak. Obviously, the pay in the NFL can be really, really good. Not that South Carolina doesn't invest there. They do, but really good pay. Someone like Jody who's, spent so much time in the NFL, you can get a pension. So every year you add helps with that. It just made a lot of sense from that standpoint. So my understanding is this had been percolating since around Super Bowl weekend as a possibility, as Clint Kubiak was looking to build out his staff, and then got finalized at some point here in the last several days. So Shane Beamer does have another search on his hands. This will be his third special teams coordinator. Jody leaving for the NFL. Before that, Pete Limbo earned the chance to go be the head coach at Buffalo. Don't know yet who it's going to be, Tyler, but from what we've been told, the goal is to try to get something, not surprisingly, nailed down as soon as possible. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something, anytime from today till the next, couple days. And it'll be an important hire for Shane Beamer, given his emphasis that he puts on it.
Well, and, when you look at the nature of those two hires in Pete Limbo and Jody Camillus, those are both guys with a ton of experience. Again, Jody spending basically 3 decades in the NFL, some brief head coaching experience when he had to fill in for, funny enough, Gary Kubiak, who was the coach of the Broncos, having some health stuff going on as the head coach at one point during his tenure there about a decade ago. And then, of course, Pete Limbo, multiple stops as a head coach before coming to Carolina. He's now gone back to being a head coach at the University of Buffalo. So I imagine whoever he hires probably going to be in that same line as an older, more experienced guy, maybe a former head coach in his own right, because typically the special teams coordinator also gets that assistant head coach moniker that's going to work side by side with Shane Beamer on a lot of things. And I would be surprised if he went with somebody that was younger and inexperienced, because, again, he seems to like a specific type of coach in that role.
Yeah, that's a really good point. in what he looks for. You know, Shane Beamer has a mix of guys and typically has a mix of guys with, you know, here's a guy with tons of experience. Here's a younger coach. You know, you look at, for instance, his last two hires for the edge position gave Sterling Lucas his very first on-field chance to run your own room coaching job. And Sterling Lucas is a guy that I am getting older, Tyler, but not that old. I covered him as a recruit. You know, same thing for Deion Barnes, a guy who's only been in the coaching industry for a little while. You know, when he hired Pete Limbo, that was the guy he wanted when he got the job, when Beamer did, heading into the 2021 season, as someone who had a lot of experience as a special teams coach, but he also had, you know, experience coaching tight ends and offensive line, and he had been a head coach at multiple schools. He just had a wealth of experience. I mean, Pete Limbo's been in the college game since 1992. Joe D, when it comes time for that, wants a very experienced guy. So I'm with you. I don't know this for sure, but I would think on Shane Beamer's list is a lot of guys that kind of fit that category, right? That have been in the game for a long time, that are veterans who've been around the block. That's really what he's looked for in a special teams coordinator so far.
And as you mentioned, that role set to be filled here pretty soon. We'll obviously react to it when we find out who that is. Speaking of coaching, by the way, we all saw this coming. The most obvious next step for Luke Doty is to join the South Carolina coaching staff as an assistant, which he'll be doing this upcoming season as an assistant to the secondary. I'm going to go ahead and call it right now. February 17th, 2026, Luke Doty's going to be the head coach at South Carolina 20 years from now. Maybe he takes over right after Beamer retires, but this is his starting point of becoming the head coach here one day. I'm calling it now.
Wow. Okay. That is a bold proclamation. If we're all still around in 20 years, we'll revisit
Doesn't it just fit him, though? Doesn't he look like the guy that would do that?
It does. The only shame in this is that Luke Doty legitimately, we think, does not have another year of eligibility.
We don't think.
So he can't pull a Zeb Nolan.
I would say, wouldn't be the first time they pulled a player out of the assistant coach pool.
You know, like if Luke just had another year somehow and was like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and start my coaching career, and then, need you. Come on. That would be the only thing that would make this story better. But no, I think he'll be great, you know, around the program. The guys know him. He has an IQ for the game. You know, Beamer has always lauded like his leadership ability. I think he's a guy that's really going to fit in the coaching industry. And I don't know, Tyler, I'm not going to go as far as you did, but I certainly think that Luke, if he wants it, has a bright future because of the attributes he has from a coaching standpoint.
If he doesn't become the coach of Carolina, I think he's going to have a successful coaching career if he chooses to continue to pursue that. I believe that's what his degree is in as well, is something around all in that realm too. And just, again, he just look at him. He's got the personality for it, right? Like, again, a guy that was willing to do anything and everything for this team, whether it be quarterback, receiver, punt returner, whatever they asked of him, he went out there and did it. And, again, a natural transition into being an assistant this upcoming year. And, we'll see what that future holds for Luke Doty, but definitely excited to see him get his, proper coaching career started. How did we do on buy or sell heading into the weekend? We mixed in a bunch of Gamecock sports. We'll dive into that coming up next. To wrap up the hour, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday on the game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Chris wrapping up the hour here on your Tuesday on the game. I have our favorite Olympic sport on television right now, curling. America taking on China. They're tied up 2-2. I don't know how long this goes, but all the American guys were happy about their last run or push or whatever it's called. So I'll take that as a positive sign.
Did they touch the stone after they let it go? Did you see all this, Tyler? We almost had some curling fights.
No, fill me in.
Yeah.
We had some curling beef.
Yeah, there was major curling beef. I think it was definitely Canada, and I think Sweden. There was an allegation that the Canadian curler, I guess.
Okay.
Guy who is there a special name for the guy who lets it go?
I'm sure there is. I'm not well versed enough.
The curler
to know that.
is what I'm going to call it.
Sure.
The guy doing the curling, throwing the stone or rolling, whatever it is. He was like letting it go, but then also touching it with his with his index finger after, which is illegal. And there were some kind of passive aggressive comments made by Sweden, and they were going back and forth. You can look it up on YouTube. It's very entertaining.
I'll have to dive into this. Look, for any sport, you're going to try to exploit as many gray areas as possible. I don't know how many gray areas there are in the sport of curling, but I'm sure that they've leveraged every possible one they can to try and gain even a small advantage on the ice. So it would not surprise me if there's a deep rabbit hole of illegal things you can do in curling that these teams might be getting away with.
Yeah, everybody's trying to get an advantage, man. So
that's right. Hey, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. That's right.
Right, that's right.
Well, we did not have any questions for our buy or sell going into the weekend in reference to the Olympics, specifically curling. We did hit a lot of Gamecock sports. Question number one was, could all three starting pitchers for South Carolina make it 4 full innings over the course of the weekend? Paul Maneri had said he was kind of keeping those guys on a pitch count. Not quite there. Brendan Stone did go 4 innings in his start on Saturday, but both Amp Phillips and Riley Goodwin both went 3 2/3 in their respective outings and their wins on Friday. Again, it's the first game of the season. You're trying to ramp these guys up, especially a guy like Goodman that's coming off of an injury, didn't pitch a season ago. So it's going to take some time before you see these guys getting 5-6 innings into these games. But as we said a little bit earlier, for what the weekend was and the concerns you have from an offensive standpoint, I thought pitching overall was pretty solid.
It was pretty solid. I think, coming out of the weekend, if you're checking boxes, like the pitching is not the one that you go to as the concern, right? It's the other side of that coin. It's the hitting at the plate. Namely, and it wasn't even like, couldn't get guys on base, right?
Yeah.
It was 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position. It was very similar metrics when you just look at opportunities when you had guys on base. South Carolina just didn't cash in enough there. But the pitching, whether it's the starters, whether it's Gunther coming in, some of the other guys that you got in there late in games, you liked what you saw overall from the first weekend.
So you were actually the only one to buy that, by the way. You thought they would all get at least 4 innings. So you came up close, but just a little bit short on that one.
Just a little short.
Just a little short. Question number 2 was the home runs for the weekend being set at 4.5. We all bought that. Unfortunately, the correct answer was sell. They came in just under it at 4. So you had Harmon and Evans with home runs on Friday's game 1. You had Scobie with his walk-off in game 2, and then Reese Moore with the home run in game number 3. So we were almost hit that number, just a little bit under there.
I felt good, after game 1, I'm like, they're going to get a couple. Like, I felt good about it, and then it fell off the rest of the weekend. So, tough. I'm not doing well so far, Tyler.
No, you're not. You're 0 for 2 so far. I will say you got number 3 right, which was a transfer. Well, I don't know. I guess we'll have to debate this. A transfer will lead the team in hits this weekend, which was half true because Tyler Bach and KJ Scobie both had 4 hits. So Bach didn't lead; he was tied with the lead. So how do we score that one?
And after game 1, I was sitting there going, Wes Mitch and Talmadge Lecroy. I'm like, that's a great pick.
Sure.
And then I ended up feeling pretty good about, I'd mentioned Bach. I didn't say this is my definite guy, but I didn't mention him. I think a tie, we should get credit.
Half credit.
Yeah, we can do half. That's fair.
So you got a half point right now.
Okay.
because Bach had a hit in the first game, then had the monster second game, 3 for 5, 4 RBIs, including 2 in the bottom of the 8th to tie things up. Scobie 0 for 4 in game number 1, 3 for 4 with the walk-off homer in game number 2, and then he had one of the few hits on Sunday for South Carolina, going 1 for 5. So those guys leading the way in terms of average so far to start this season. We transition over to the other Diamond sport, Gamecock softball, at least 2 run rule wins, and we all bought that and hit it right on the number because their wins against Louisville and Kansas State were both run rule games.
Yeah, really nice weekend for Gamecock softball, right? You know, you had the games against Virginia Tech early that ended up being, you know, disappointing losses for you. As Wes pointed out, Virginia Tech kind of did to you what you had done at South Carolina at the beginning of last year. But after those hiccups against Virginia Tech, you took care of business with a couple run rule wins against Binghamton and against Winthrop. And you came into this weekend, you know, with the Carolina Classic, had a 4 games that you were going to end up playing against Louisville, Boston, and Kennesaw State. You were able to grab a couple run rules in those games, including against a Power 4 opponent in Louisville, and you won all of them, right? So you get a 9-1 run rule win in game 1. You bookend that with a 12-0 5-inning win against Kennesaw State, and you beat Boston and look pretty good doing it in between. So really nice way to get back on track for Ashley Chastain Woodard and her team this weekend.
By the way, Carly Shelton with the stats of the weekend, and 9 of 16 and 8 RBIs over the course of 4 games.
That is, we were talking about it even after that first weekend. You're going, hey, they had some pitching struggles against VT. That's an area you got to figure out. But the left side of your infield, which is the biggest question, played pretty well. The bats looked pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, are there still some questions as this thing goes on? Sure, but Carly Shelton with a big weekend, and then overall the bats look pretty good too. By the way, Tyler, I went and looked at what has Virginia Tech done, because remember we were like, hey, are they this year's South Carolina, where they were ranked coming in. They were like number 16, I think, when South Carolina played them, or something like that. They were a top 25 team. Virginia Tech is 7-2 now. They have dropped a couple games. They dropped a Saturday game over the weekend to Charlotte 4-2, and they also lost by 1 against Michigan State 7-6. So just if that helps with a little context on how they've done so far.
Last buy or sell, Medina Okada had 2 straight double-doubles going in Saturday night. Would she get a third? And we all bought. Yes, indeed, she did. 12 points and 17 rebounds, helping South Carolina pick up the 79-72 win. And she's going to be vitally important for this team's success as we close out the regular season and her tournament play coming up here in a couple weeks.
Yep, a big one. I thought that, given and LSU played well inside, they did a really good job rebounding. Like LSU was a little bit better. There were a few possessions where you're like, God, they just got 2 or 3 offensive rebounds in a row. But Okot was outstanding, had the big-time late basket, had some great finishes around the rim. She was certainly huge in the game, no doubt about it.
There's your buy or sell for the weekend. We'll have another one coming up on Friday. That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself and Bill Gunner up next on your Tuesday on the Game.
Let's close things out by telling you about our friends over at Integrated Media, Michael, Nathan, their entire team. They are outstanding as a one-stop shop for all of your tech and audio visual solutions at your home. They can also help out your business. They've been to my home and to Wes's home and helped us out with a variety of projects. Whether you need something as simple as just getting a new TV, mounting that new TV, a complete smart home solution where you can control your lights, devices, thermostats from a touch of a button, or making sure that your Wi-Fi signal throughout your home is as strong as possible, inside your home, outside your home, around your home. If you've got any dead spots, if you need your equipment upgraded, They can even provide you great advice and consultation on what you may need as far as upgrading your service provider. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327. Give them a call today.